I absolutely love making the flying geese quilt block. Just like the half square triangle, the flying geese block is very versatile and that there are a lot of different quilt patterns that use the flying geese quilt block. I have made quite a few different patterns using this block and it is so fun to make. Also, like the half square triangle, the flying geese block can be made using a few different methods. And I feel like the trick to enjoying making the flying geese quilt block is by finding the method to make it that works best for you. I'm going to share 3 different methods for making the flying geese quilt block, and I'm of course going to start with my favorite method. For my favorite method for flying geese, I'm going to show you how I size the flying geese up and then trim it down to the perfect size that I need. All 3 methods for flying geese are going to result in a flying geese that is 3.5 inches by 6.5 inches. And for this block, here's the fabric that you'll need. You'll need a large square that is 7.5 inches, and then you're going to cut it along the diagonal 2 times. And then you'll need 4.5 inch squares that are cut along the diagonal 1 time. The first thing we're going to do is take our triangle for the wing of the flying geese and we're going to lay right sides together. Get it right in the corner here. And then we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam. The nice thing about sizing this block up is that if things get wonky with your sewing, you're still going to get a perfect flying geese because you're going to trim this down. So I'm going to press the seam with my fingers. And then I'm going to press it with my iron. All right, now that it's nice and pressed really flat, I'm going to do the same thing with the other side. So I'm going to get that other triangle right in the corner, sew a 1/4 inch seam and press it. All right, now that we have both sides to the flying geese sewn on and we have it pressed really well, it's time to trim the block. And you'll just want to use your favorite flying geese trimmer to trim it up. I'm using my favorite trimmer here. I like that I can just line up the etched lines on it and I have my 1/4 inch at the point that I need to get my perfect flying geese so that when I sew these together at some point for my pattern, I'll always have that nice point here. So I'm just going to trim. All right, and just like that, I have a perfect flying geese block using my favorite method for flying geese. The second method for flying geese I want to show you is using foundation paper piecing. I'm going to be using the foundation papers from It's So Emma. Inside of the booklet, there are a lot of tips and instructions as well as cutting information. Here are the cuts for my foundation papers, but there are a lot of different foundation papers out there, so make sure you make the cuts needed for your papers. Here's the fabric I'm using for the center of the flying geese, and on this paper we make both flying geese at the same time. So I'm going to turn my paper over and I'm going to make sure that this rectangle is kind of centered in the middle of my foundation paper, and you can use glue or a pin and just pop it in there to hold it in place while you sew. Now I'm going to look and see which triangle we're going to sew on first for the corners of the flying geese, and you can see they're numbered, so we would do number 2 next. So you can just choose either one since we're doing them both at the same time. I like to fold my paper over and kind of crease it so that I can make sure when I'm lining up my next piece, I have it lined up over that line. So I'm going to grab one of my triangles And then I'm going to make sure I overlay it across that line at least 1/4 of an inch. And I also want to make sure when I flip it, it covers that area. So I don't want to be too far to one side or the other. So you can kind of turn it over and see if it's lining up properly. I'm not going to lie here. Foundation paper piecing is not my forte at all. It is not something that I prefer when I am sewing. So I'm not the best at it at all. And I definitely prefer more traditional piecing, but it is nice that if you are good at foundation paper piecing, that there are a lot of intricate designs you can do, and it is very, very accurate. All right, so now that I have those two pinned in place, I'm going to sew right along the line here. All right, so after sewing, we're going to fold over right along that line we stitched. And just so we don't have a lot of bulk on our flying geese, we're going to trim 1/4 inch away from our folded paper. Right, I'm going to remove my pins, and then we can fold that wing over on our flying geese and press it. So we just work through this the same way. I'm going to fold over, kind of crease my fabric. Going to place my triangle on where it's about 1/4 inch over that crease. I like to fold it, make sure it's filling up the area that I need. Place a pin in. And then I'm going to sew across that line again. Right, so again, I'm going to trim away any excess fabric. And I'm going to press my seam. All right, and then I have just 2 more triangles to sew on, doing that same step over again 2 more times. After getting the triangle sewn into place, it still kind of looks not quite right, and that is the case for any foundation paper piecing project. So we're going to flip it over and we're going to cut along the lines that the pattern indicates. All right, and there we go. There are 2 more perfect flying geese using the foundation paper piecing method. I will link to these foundation papers in the description. One of the reasons I really like this brand is that the papers are so thin, which makes it really easy to pull the papers off later after sewing the blocks together. Now, the third method I want to share with you for flying geese is the 4 at a time method. And for this method, we need 1 7.5 inch square and 4 4-inch squares. On the back of the 4-inch squares, we're going to draw a line from corner to corner. And to start this method, we are going to line up those smaller squares in opposite corners. And you'll see that the line makes one long continuous line. We're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam along each side of that drawn line. All right, we have 1 line of stitches sewn on, and now we're just going to sew the other side. Okay, now we have both lines of stitches sewn, and now we're just going to cut along that drawn line. You can use your rotary cutter if you would like. I probably should have. Okay, so now you have 2 pieces that look like this, and we're going to press the seams. After pressing the seams, now we're going to line up another of those 4-inch squares in the corner, just like so, and we're going to sew along each side of that diagonal line, again with 1/4 inch seams. Okay, so again, we're going to cut along that drawn line, and then we will press the seams, and trim this down to 3.5 by 6.5 inches. Okay, so trim again, just use your favorite trim tool, or I can link a method for trimming using any ruler that you already own. There you go, just like that, you'll have a perfect flying geese. And again, this method is 4 at a time, so you have that second one, and then after finishing up that other piece, you will have 2 more. So there are the 3 methods for perfect flying geese. I hope you find a method that works well for you. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.